You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button.
Friday afternoon, Harold Perkins announces on his social media that he will return for the 2025 season and play for LSU one more time. And I would like to think this isn't going to be met with any mixed reaction. Like, you should be ecstatic right now that Harold Perkins is coming back. I understand the last two seasons with Harold Perkins have not gone nearly to the grand plans that anybody had. Like, understand that, anybody. The coaching staff, Harold Perkins himself, the fan base, the national media, the media locally. It has not gone up to this that anybody had. But we said it when Harold Perkins went down with the ACL earlier this fall, and you were looking forward at how LSU would fix that, would fill that void the rest of the season. And one thing that was consistently said is you are not better without Harold Perkins on the field. Now, Whit Weeks emerged, put together a great season, and it looked like for a moment there that you weren't going to miss Perkins as much as we all thought. But even then, Weeks' production dipped off a little bit. You rotated more guys in at linebacker. You were still good. You were still very, but you weren't, in my opinion, you weren't better there. It allowed everybody to play a little bit more free, sure, but I'm not going to sit there and say that you were better. With Harold Perkins coming back for 25, you are better. 100% and immediately. There were plenty of options on the table for Harold Perkins, and he chose the one to come back to LSU after the last 2 years haven't gone as planned. And look, we'll talk about what the role looks like for him going forward at LSU, because if one thing that we all could agree on, whether it was LSU was better without him this year, LSU wasn't better, LSU's better immediately with him back, whatever we're disagreeing on, potentially the one thing that we absolutely can agree on is it can't go forward into his final year at LSU with the same trajectory, with the same plan as it has the last two, because that clearly just has not worked. But just for conversation's sake, what you're getting back in Harold Perkins is an incredibly versatile defender who is good in coverage, who can run sideline to sideline at the linebacker position, who can rush off the edge, who has totaled 164 tackles in 2.5 seasons. Really, maybe 2 full seasons in all in 3 years. Maybe you'll give him 2.5. 27.5 tackles for a loss, 13 sacks. He's a game changer. He's an absolute game changer. Now, what does the role potentially look like for him going forward? Well, the in-the-box linebacker, that's got to be a thing of the past. That has to be, you're moving on. You have to move on. In order to maximize Harold Perkins in 2025 and maximize LSU as a team, you have to move on from that. I know a lot of people are just going to say, rush him off the edge all the time. Well, no, because you saw his freshman season when he burst onto the scene that eventually, down the stretch of that season, teams schemed him out of that role. And you weren't, especially after that Arkansas game, he was schemed out of that role by opposing offenses, and it wasn't nearly as effective. With a guy like Perkins, you can't necessarily just pigeonhole him into one thing because of the versatility that we just mentioned. He can play in coverage. He can run sideline to sideline. Yes, he can rush off the edge. He can do all those types of things. Where he's best is creating havoc, and that's where Blake Baker's defense is best at. That's his strength. They had moved Harold Perkins to star right before he got injured. I like that spot for him. You have a need there as well because that spot allows him to play in coverage. It allows him to run sideline to sideline. It allows him to bring pressure. You saw Major Burns' pressure numbers go way up this year with him playing in that role. That looks like, on paper at least, where you can maximize everything that Harold Perkins can do. And then you can move him around in certain packages because you have other guys who can also play that spot. You're probably going to see Javian Toviano play that spot a good bit in the bowl game coming up on New Year's Eve. The other thing that it does is look at LSU's linebacker room for next season. I mean, sheesh. Harold Perkins, Whit Weeks, West Weeks, Devon Keys, and then, oh, by the way, you remember how high Brian Kelly was on all the recruits that LSU brought in at linebacker in this cycle? Brian Kelly, and this is how you know, Brian Kelly, in his signing day press conference, he went through each player individually. Normally, sometimes how that'll work is, you'll have questions about, they'll kind of go down the list because you're given a list, and they'll go down the list and ask about each guy. Brian Kelly did it himself in his open. And the guys he talked the most about, like you could go back and listen to it, and when I cut it up, I noticed this. The longest answers were about the linebackers. They were about Charles Ross. They were about Jaden Breaker, right? They were about Keelan Moses. They were about Zach Weeks. They were about those guys. You bring all of that in with Harold Perkins, Whit Weeks, West Weeks, Devon Keys, and those 4 freshmen, and you got a squad at linebacker. You have arguably LSU's strongest position group on defense next year at linebacker. And not all of it, but a large majority of that, or a large part of that, I should say, is due to Harold Perkins returning. You should be ecstatic today about this, despite how the last 2 seasons went. Because for Harold to come back, for LSU and him to reach this decision, there's a plan there. There is a plan there to maximize him going forward. Because otherwise, Harold Perkins could have gone to the draft. Go look at everybody's big board. He was still rated like the third best, inside linebacker or in the box linebacker in this draft, even after what you had seen, just because of the ability and the potential and the athletic ability and everything there. There's going to be a plan there. And I think what you're going to see it more closely resembles what everybody thought when Blake Baker took this job, where as soon as that happened, everybody's like, oh, Harold Perkins is about to be an absolute monster. That's the hope now for 2025. Massive news. Not totally unexpected news, right? I mean, the rumblings about this had been pretty strong for, the better half of 2 months, maybe, I'd say. But now it's official. And it's damn exciting. It's just another reason to be fired up and optimistic about the roster construction that LSU has put together for 2025. It fuels the expectation. And ultimately, whether you meet them or not, that's going to be a separate thing. But the expectation belongs at LSU, and this heightens it. And it's a huge, huge win for LSU to get Harold Perkins back. On to 2025, man. You got the bowl game. I get it. On to 2025. Hey, it's going to be a fun offseason and a fun lead up to that opener against Clemson.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.